Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Sasha Ramirez, the Communications Manager in the Education and Skills Directorate at the OECD. Today, the robots are coming for your job. We're talking, of course, about AI and the changing world of work. Is it a revolution, an evolution? It's really hard to say. But what's clear is that AI is changing the nature of work in many industries. Taxi driving, Hollywood, programming, these and many others are being affected by AI. So, what kind of skills do we, the human people, need to compete or collaborate with the machines? Sometimes those machines can do our jobs better and more cheaply. Other times they can help us do our jobs more quickly and better. What does this mean for the millions of adults across the OECD and beyond who don't even have the basic skills to read a prescription on a bottle or to do basic math? Should I be worried about my own job? Well, I don't know if our panelists can help me with that last question, but I'm sure they'll be able to help us shed a lot of light on the others. Let me introduce Noah Baldwin. He's the Interim Executive Director of the Future Skills Center. He's joining us from Canada. We have Dave Trout, who's a numeracy and math education teacher and facilitator from Australia. And we have Steen Bruck, my colleague. He's a senior economist at the OECD. I want to start with Steen, who's going to set the scene for us. But before I do, don't forget that this is a curtain raiser. It's a teaser for a major study that the OECD is about to release on the 10th of December, which will tell us about how adult skills have changed in the past 10 years. It's really important. It's going to be a whole new big data set that will give us the latest picture of how adults across the OECD and beyond are have the skills today, are able to perform today at the level they need. Make sure you tune in for that global launch. So, Steen, let me start with you to set the scene for us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, depending upon where you are. My name is Stijn Brugge. I lead several projects on the future of work and skills here at the OECD. And as part of that work, we've been closely tracking and monitoring how OECD labor markets have been changing as a result of trends such as globalization, or perhaps the reversal of it, population aging, and of course, technological change, including artificial intelligence, which is the topic of today's conversation. Now, I think it's fair to say that labor markets are in a constant state of flux, and that means that employers, workers, but also education and training institutions need to adapt, and that includes adjusting to changing skills needs as new technologies automate some tasks that humans do, but also create new ones that require new skills. And so, if we want to make sure that we keep abreast of these changes, that we are prepared for this new world of work, we need to better understand what skills are demanded, but also what skills the working age population has. In other words, how well does the demand and the supply of skills align? And I think this is why the OECD survey of adult skills, which will be published, as Sasha said, on the 10th of December, is such a valuable resource. It gives us a snapshot of the state of basic skills in OECD countries, which doesn't only allow comparisons with other countries and benchmarking, but also within countries over time. As we know from previous editions of the Survey of Adult Skills, there is a significant share of the workforce in OECD countries that lacks basic skills, including digital skills, and therefore they're very poorly prepared for the changes that lie ahead in the labor market. Now, technology has moved on a lot since the last time we ran the survey of adult skills. We have generative AI now, which possesses literacy skills that exceed that of many adults. And so the question is how these basic skills have evolved since the last time we ran the survey. Have they improved? And what skills do people actually use in work today? Are we better prepared than we were over a decade ago? Or are we facing an even more alarming situation today? So these are the kinds of questions that I think the survey of adult skills will help us answer. And in preparation for the launch of that survey, we're organizing this webinar today to whet your appetite, discuss one of the biggest questions I think we face today, which is how AI is changing the world of work and the skills that are demanded in the workplace. Have we reached a point where human skills are becoming redundant and the machine takes over? Or is there still a place in the labor market for humans? And if so, what is that place? And what can we do, employers, workers, unions, training institutions, policymakers, to help us through this transition? So I hope this helped you set the scene. And Sasha, I'm ready for this discussion. I look forward to it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Stan. Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic. I mean, it's on the one hand, we feel as though we're on the precipice of a huge change. But on the other, it's really hard to predict how that change is going to roll out. So looking forward to this skills discussion. So I want to open things up to the panel. But before we do, huge thanks. I see people joining us online from Joburg, Mauritius, Brazil, Canada, the Philippines, Poland, everywhere, all over the world. So you can see there's real interest in this topic. And thanks to everyone who submitted a question beforehand. We really appreciate those. They help us frame the conversation in important ways. We received a ton of good questions. And a reminder to anyone who's joined us, if you want to ask a question that you haven't been able to do yet, please post it in the chat and we'll try to get to it when we can. So let's start the discussion. Noel, I want to start with you. Tell us about the Future Skills Center. What does it do? How does it work?
Yeah, thanks, Sasha, and thanks for having us on the webinar today. So the Future Skills Center is a research center funded by our federal government here in Canada through something they call the Future Skills Initiative. And we sort of have two primary mandates, but all kind of focused around investigating the kind of skills that we think Canadians are going to need to navigate a really rapidly changing labor market and economy and society. We do that primarily through kind of pulling on two levers. So one is working with a network of researchers who are keeping track of some of the kind of latest uh, work OECD and others are doing around these questions, the kinds of skills that people need, how do we develop them? And then we're using that as a guide to make investments in pilot initiatives, really trying to find where there's innovation in skills development and supporting moving kind of new ideas from concept to implementation and then ultimately to scale to see how we can have an impact on the delivery of skills development. So in the last 5 years, just for example, we've invested in more than 385 skills innovation initiatives, really, as I say, kind of focused on trying to support Canadians to have those skills they're going to need. And then the final piece of the puzzle is we take everything we learn from those initiatives and we try to bring it back into the dialogue with policymakers and practitioners, with employers and workers, to try and have a kind of informed conversation about where the future appears to be heading. So today's topic is perfectly aligned with everything we're trying to do.
Thanks, Noel. It's really interesting. I mean, I think that question of how do we get these things to scale is one that's going to be really important, and I hope we can come back to it in the discussion. But first, Dave, I want to go to you because I know you were involved in the first PAC, the first survey of adult skills. I think that was 15 years ago, so quite a long time ago. So tell us about how the world of tech has changed and changed the demands of skills since that time.
Yeah, thanks. And hi, everybody. I've been involved in these international surveys predates PAC. So I was involved in the first time. My background is numeracy and mathematics. So I actually started back in the late 1990s in terms of my career into these international assessments. But certainly I think since PAC Cycle 1 up to now, I think there's been a really dramatic change in terms of that advancement. And I don't think any of us expected that we'd all have on our computers now ChatGPT or Copilot. We now have a choice of AI that we can use in our lives, whether that be at work or at home. So I think the changes in that period since PAC Cycle 1 and PAC Cycle 2 have been dramatic. And hopefully I'm really excited that, the PAC data is coming out on the 10th of December, and I can't wait. I mean, I've actually seen some of it, and I'm in a privileged position to have been able to see the data. And I think all I can say is I think it is going to tell a richer story than the previous cycle. So everybody should be sitting there waiting for the data to come out. And I think a lot of why that's happened and why we've probably enhanced the PAC assessment is because we had to face up to that issue of how skills have changed in that intervening period. And we've always done that as we go from cycle to cycle. The assessment and the construct that we assess against is improved because of what's happening out in the world. And I think in terms of the workplace, there's undoubtedly a big change in terms of automation and in terms of technology and now the role of AI. And therefore, I think what people are expected to do, and I think this is true in our society as well, in our community and our engagement as a citizen, I think what we're now expected to do and how we are expected to problem solve and the skills we use have gone from just reading print-based materials and turning the page is to now navigating and engaging with this, complex world of information, of data, of chat GPT being able to respond to a question. But what questions do you ask? And how do you analyze that data? How do you make decisions on all of the data that you're being bombarded with? I mean, the pandemic, I think, was a really good example of how everybody, was impacted by the world of big data. And we were all given logarithmic graphs of data about the pandemic. And I kept sitting there with my numeracy maths hat thinking, I know the PAC data, maybe 5% of the population can interpret that sort of data. So these are just examples, I think, of how things have changed really quickly. And I think that therefore the literacy and numeracy and problem solving skills that people are required to now use in the workplace or in their lives has just grown exponentially. So I think what we might have thought about even 10 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago, 30 years ago, the literacy and numeracy skills that people are required simply to navigate the world that we live and work in have increased. So in the past, we might have talked about, the ability to read and write at a basic level and to know a bit about arithmetic has skyrocketed. So I think all of the research I've read about what, workplaces are now requiring is you need people to be able to critically reflect, to be able to make decisions, to be able to problem solve, to make inferences, to make things meet different criteria. It just goes on and on. And each of those skills, whether it be numeracy or mathematical, the sophistication of what they're expected to engage in has grown. And so I think how we describe foundation skills has to change and has to grow with us. So I think the PAC data is going to help us, negotiate that and find out more, and then how we move forward in this space.
Thanks so much, David. So I think it might be helpful maybe to give those who don't know, who are online, just a very quick basic understanding of how we grade skills. I mean, so we have a kind of scale in PIAC and how others do it when we talk about the kind of levels and things like that. Do you have a kind of basic idea of how we can convey that to people?
Well, yes. I mean, it's the whole adult population. So, I mean, we go from what's called below level 1, which are very, very basic skills. Like if I put my numeracy hat on, that means you can count, you can add up some numbers, some basic whole numbers and so on. So below level 1 is really, really simple. And as you progress up level 5, I mean, we actually find it hard in such international assessments to get questions that are up at level 5. So level 5 means in mathematics, we've got 1 or 2, but you're actually analyzing complex data, probably embedded in maybe mathematical formulae, obviously within an authentic context. And in the middle, you're hovering around being able to interpret different sorts of sets of data in different sorts of graphs. The lower levels could be just a straight bar chart with whole numbers, but at levels 2 and 3, you're starting to increase ones where you might have different scales on the different axes, and you're expected to interpret and do some reflection on it. So from below level 1 to level 5 covers an enormous range of skills, both in literacy and numeracy. So it is, it's a normal curve of obviously abilities, but most of the people are in the middle. But in all countries, there's significant numbers at the bottom, and I think sometimes it's a bit worrying that there aren't enough people up at the top. But that's really what the discussion is about today. So I hope that helps explain it. But the below level 1 is very basic. And there's a lot of adults in most countries that are at that bottom level. And we both reading, in literacy and in numeracy, we now have the components. So in numeracy, the components, it's the first time it's happened in PIAC. So we now have questions that can tell us whether adults can count numbers up to 20. So they might have an image of some apples, and they have to tell us how many apples there are. So that we didn't know in the past what adults could do at the bottom end. So I think PIAC this time is going to tell us a lot more about people at the bottom end. And I think both in literacy and numeracy, we've also tried to have more 21st century types of questions at the top end, where we're trying to get to find out whether people can do some of that critical reflection and reasoning at the top end.
Thanks. No, that's a great overview, and I think when you illustrate the fact that there are many people around across the OECD and around the world who don't even have the basic skills to kind of count, do basic
Yeah,
arithmetic and things like that. When you bring up that pandemic example, well, of course, people won't understand the data that they're being shown. Of course, people are more susceptible to fake news and data
yeah,
being used, poor quality data being used. So I think it's really critical that we get that right, that we make sure that skills are going in the right way to even catch up to this fast pace of technological process, right?
yep,
Fantastic. So Steen, I mean, Steen, I have to admit, I'm somewhat of an AI revolution skeptic. I know there was a lot of hype when ChatGPT came out, and people said the whole world's going to change overnight. But you've seen a lot of investors and people kind of stepping back from that a little bit. But are we at the cusp of a revolution? Is AI going to completely supplant the human race, and will we still even have jobs in the future? I think these are basic questions. Do you have any answers to those?
I'll try. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's fair to say that people are worried. We see it in the media all the time. We've seen it, especially since I think the release of ChatGPT, because it became so real to people what AI could do. And we did a survey at the OECD. This was before the release of ChatGPT. We did this in the manufacturing and finance sectors of 7 OECD countries. And we asked workers in those sectors about AI, workers who work with AI, workers who had heard about AI. And a fair share of workers were very to extremely worried. 1 in 5 workers, in fact, said they were very to extremely worried about losing their job to AI. So the fear is out there. At the OECD, we've also estimated the risk of automation. Now, that's not just AI, it's broader than AI, it's automating technologies more broadly. But more than a third of jobs or in occupations, they're at high risk of automation. So that risk exists, and people are to some extent right to worry about their jobs in the future. Now, when we look at the data, we don't actually see an impact on employment at the aggregate level so far. In fact, in most OECD countries, despite all the automation, despite all the technology, employment rates are actually at record highs. So how is that? Now, perhaps on the one hand, we're still in early days when it comes to AI adoption. I think many companies are still experimenting with AI, including with generative AI. I think we're still in an experimental phase into what can we really use this technology for? So we're discovering at the moment. So perhaps the adoption of these technologies is still relatively low. But I also think that when we talk about, for example, these estimates and the risk of automation, we should remember that these are theoretical estimates. It's about what the technology could, in theory, do. That doesn't mean that in practice we will actually do all these things for a number of reasons. We take decisions about what we use technology for and what we don't use it for. But I think what's really critical also is that AI will not just destroy tasks and jobs, but AI will also create new ones. Of very specialized jobs, AI specialists, people who have the skills to actually develop AI and maintain it, etc. But I think most of the job creation will be indirect because what AI will do, I think, is that it will mostly augment us. It will make us better at our jobs. And so it will make us more productive. It will improve the quality of the goods and services that we produce, reduce the price of them. That will increase demand for these goods and services. And as a result, will increase demand for workers also. So in fact, we're already beginning to see this when we look at the correlation between the exposure of occupations to AI and job growth in those occupations. It's we see more job growth in the occupations most exposed to AI. Now, this is very tentative evidence so far, but it's consistent with what we've seen with technologies and its impact on the labor market in the past. In the long run, technologies seem to create more and better jobs. Now, there's a catch here, and that is that it's mostly high-skilled people who will benefit from this job growth. And again, that's a continuation of what we've seen in the past. We've seen more and better jobs, more high-skilled jobs. And so the low-skilled people are those who remain at highest risk of automation. It's those people that risk falling behind, losing out, unless, of course, we manage to invest and equip them with the skills needed to thrive in this new world of work.
That's so interesting. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely it's this the bottom kind of, quintile or bottom percent of people that we have to be worried about who don't have those skills. And let's put a pin in that because I really do want to come back to it. But Noel and Dave, I saw you nodding along when Stain talked about the kind of fear of people that their jobs will be replaced by machines. Is that the same impression you have from Canada and from Australia? Maybe Noel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, we've actually been asking Canadians about this for the last 5 years, and we actually started with the question: are people worried about the robots coming to take their job? And we've gotten since the release of ChatGPT, we've gotten more specific about asking people about AI. One of the things I think is interesting is Canadians, by and large, are actually quite comfortable with the role of technology in the workplace. Broadly, they see it as benefiting them. They like to see investments in new technology in the firms where they work. With AI in particular, two things that I think are notable. The people who are using AI at work, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on because I want to get into it. But two things are interesting. One, lots of the folks who are using AI at work right now would like to see their employer invest more and move faster to bring it into the workplace because they feel it makes them creative, it makes them productive. But the more they use it, the more worried they are about the effects in the long run on their employment, right? So there's a bit of ignorance is bliss. If you're not using it right now, you might not worry as much about it. But I think folks also see the power of it, and how it's helping them reshape the way that they are doing their jobs. So there's some interesting push and pull there, I think, right? Some mixed feelings among Canadians who are using AI.
Fascinating. Yeah, definitely echoes my own experience. I wish the OECD would, be a bit more, let's say, active in-house using AI. But at the moment, my computer barely works on its own, so I think I'll hold my breath for that for a little while longer. Dave, how about from Australia? What's the feeling there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar, but I was actually talking to the sort of the education and training manager for one of Australia's industry groups just last week, or the week before now, and they've actually just published a report about they do every 2 years do a report and they send out surveys to their businesses and members of their association, and they ask about the impact of literacy and numeracy on those businesses. And this time round, 88% of those businesses that said they were impacted by low levels of literacy and numeracy. That's combined. But when we were talking to him, I then asked him, and what about the impact? Because I knew this webinar was coming up. So I said, so what's your view and the association's view about the impact of AI and automation? And, is it, seen as a positive or seen as challenging? What do you think about that in terms of foundation skills? And he said, well, first thing I'll say is that people need high levels of foundation skills because the problem with AI and automation is that when things go wrong, you need to be able to problem solve. And that was the first thing he said. It's that people, if you're going to use automation or AI, you need to have those thinking skills, the problem solving skills in order to enable the system to work and be efficient and to check that it's doing the right thing and all that. So instead of dumbing it down, it's actually requiring workers to have higher level skills. So I think his concern seemed to be about whether, therefore, the businesses had the capacity to cope with it and implement it. So I think I think it's seen as something that's really positive, but I think people are challenged by it.
That's so interesting because I think especially, unlike other technologies, AI is in many ways still a black box, right? I mean, we still don't know what's happening inside of many models. So how do you even approach issues when they arise without actually understand, even when the smartest people don't really understand what's going on in those systems? So we've had a comment I want to bring in quickly from Jeno Ray Baring, who says that, she's noticed that many colleagues are hesitant about AI integration, worrying that it'll also diminish the creative thinking skills, the other skills of people. And you see this in worry in education already. If you're able to use a chatbot to write your essays for you, does it actually force you to have that productive struggle that you need to actually develop your faculties? But Noel, I want to go back to you because I think both of you had mentioned this issue about what is the definition of foundational skills. And we've had a question from Akhtar Murshid from Bangladesh, who's wondering, given that the AI landscape is evolving, do you actually think this definition of foundational skills will remain the same today, tomorrow?
I mean, I think it's already evolving, right? And I think it's reflected, frankly, in the way that the OECD's PAC assessment has evolved, right? It's no longer limited to trying to examine skills around literacy and numeracy. It has already advanced into problem solving and into social emotional skills, right? So I think broadly speaking, that concept has already been changing. The government of Canada a few years ago released something that they call their Skills for Success framework, which does include literacy and numeracy, both on the literacy side, both reading and writing, but also includes adaptability and collaboration, digital skills, creativity, problem solving, and others. And I mean, effectively, what the government of Canada is saying is these are the skills that people need to be able to sort of make their way through the labor market today. I think the one thing I want to touch on, and Dave has pointed this out a couple of times already, and Dave, if you want to jump in on this, I think the thing that I will kind of try to strongly leave people with today is that a lot of those things are based on that foundation of literacy and numeracy, that information processing skill base leads you to a number of those other skill sets. And so the link between them is incredibly important. And as we continue this conversation, we need to keep coming back to that point, right? We do need people to have strong information processing skills that start with literacy and numeracy and ladder up from there, right? That idea of foundational skills doesn't mean that they're not important or that they're too basic. It's literally setting the foundation for these other things that come. And the comment you were just making about sort of worrying about whether the use of AI will get people out of practice with some of the other skills. I'd at least in my experience to date and working both with our staff who are starting to use AI in our work, but others as well. I mean, there's a huge amount of information processing skill that still has to happen. Dave was talking about this, right? But everything from understanding how to ask the right question to get what you want out of the model, but then also looking at what the model gives you and assessing and analyzing whether it's actually responded to the question, whether it's giving you what you need in order to move on to the next task. Those are all things that are built on that foundation of literacy and numeracy and problem solving. And Dave's done a really eloquent job of pointing that out. So I just want to echo that and say, like, we're constantly building out this idea of what are the basic skills that people need to have to navigate work. AI skills are going to come into that, I'm sure, by the next time we do PAC. But it does start with some of those foundational skills that we've been talking about for, decades now.
Thanks, Noel. Yeah, I see that. People from Canada are agreeing with you. We have a comment from Annette Como who's saying that, they are also really programming for SMEs in this respect to focus on foundational skills. But Dave, I want to turn to you then. Let's get your take on this. I mean, this issue about really the building blocks, the foundational skills starting from there. How can we, build these out in an AI world and really build those basic skills that adults need to thrive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a challenge. I mean, I think, the way we've obviously been talking about that these foundation skills are increasing in complexity. So, I think what needs to change from somebody who's worked in the adult literacy and numeracy sector nearly all my career, there's two groups, and traditionally we have focused in literacy and numeracy in adult education on the groups at the bottom end. That is what I call in PAC below level 1 and level 1. And that that's a no-brainer. We should be investing because we know that the impacts from all the research we've done from all the international assessments that improving people's literacy and numeracy skills has benefits to everybody, the individual, society, employment, so that is a group that it's about social equity and opportunities, and they are locked out of so many things, getting a job for a start. And now when we talk about the impact of AI and automation, then, they're locked out even more. And the jobs that are disappearing are the jobs that in the past they might have been able to do that were the sort of the routine jobs where you didn't have to think. But those are the jobs that are disappearing. So therefore, that lower performing group are going to still be the most challenged. So we still need to, I think, enhance the programs and how we support, those learners to achieve the skills to even get a job and even to be able to negotiate the world they're now living in. I mean, once upon a time in Australia, if you wanted, it's called Centrelink here, when you wanted social security benefits, you went and spoke to a person. Well, that disappeared. You had to go and log in on a computer. Well, if you've got low literacy and numeracy skills, you can't even log onto a computer. And for some training of teachers I did recently, I went to our Centrelink site just to have a look at how complicated it was. And, after a few clicks, I was starting to give up. So if you don't have literacy skills and you're at that bottom end, then you are locked out. So that's the group that traditionally we focused on. But I think, and I've been doing some work based on the PIAC Cycle 2 data with colleagues from both the numeracy expert group and the literacy expert group, and with a team led by Owen Kirsch at ETS. And what we've been doing is actually analysing the data and all of the questions that we've asked in PIAC Cycle 2 to try and get a feel for where this sort of, if you like, this cutoff point is. Where on the PX scale do people need to be to maybe have the skills, the foundation skills that I think we now need to call them, to take the opportunities of what AI and automation is doing. That is, at what point on our scale are people possibly got the skills to take the opportunities? That is, that they can do that critical reflection, do that analysing, be the decision makers, question what outputs are, know how to input into the system. And we've decided that it's probably, well into level 3, the tipping point up to 4. So, and traditionally we might have sat back and said, okay, if you're at level 2 and 3, you're probably okay. And depending on where you want to go, you might need some extra support and teaching and training. What we're now saying is to take advantage of this era of AI and automation to do the things that Noel's been talking about, we've all been talking about. You actually need to be up well into level 3 and into level 4. So that's a group that we think should be targeted in this period because they have got some basic foundation skills. They have a reasonable vocab. They've probably got the learning to learn skills. Their number sense is probably okay. So their basics are okay. So they're starting off from a point where if we do train them and support them in critical thinking, in decision making and all of that, they're probably going to learn pretty quickly. So I think it's about, in terms of, this is probably part of some of the following questions, but in terms of policies and programs targeted at workplaces, I think it's now we should be targeting the bottom group for sure. But in terms of employers getting what they want and getting workers with the skills, maybe we need to be targeting those who are at level 2 and 3 and upskilling them. And probably the skilling won't take as long because they aren't starting from back in the basics. So I think, that's, we didn't set out to find it. We sort of set out to find it, but the report hasn't been published yet, unfortunately, by today, but it will come out soon. But I think, that to me means that foundation skills can be described as a hierarchy and not that once you're up at 3, you're okay, that foundation skills and literacy and numeracy skills aren't important anymore. And it's still a lot about literacy. It's interpreting, it's negotiating with different texts, it's understanding different mathematical representations. But it is about having those skills to be able to reason and critically problem solve, make decisions in an educated way. So I think it's how we now talk about what this data is going to show us and what that means for our practices and our training and education systems.
It's so
Sorry
interesting.
if that was a long response, but yeah.
No, it's great. And I do want to ask a follow-up actually, because I want to get to the policy implications. But first, you're an educator. Do you think that our education systems are working in this respect? There's a lot of focus on subject matter, competency skills, but I mean, are we doing enough on the foundational skills side of things?
Have we got a half an hour? So, I mean, I think we know from PISA, as well. I was fortunate enough to also work on PISA for a period of time. So I think, a lot of the evidence that we have shows that school leavers and adults don't have a lot of those skills that we require outside of the classroom. So I think that, and we know from PIAC, for example, that the peak performance is when people are in their mid-20s into their 30s. So in other words, students, when they leave school, aren't at the peak of their academic excellence. You actually need to be out in the workforce and in your life using and applying your literacy and numeracy skills, and then they improve. So we know it's in those years in the 20s and 30s that you're most productive in terms of improving your literacy and numeracy skills. So you're starting off down here, and as you get into the workforce and you attend uni and all those things, you do improve your literacy and numeracy skills. So we are starting down here. So if students, when they leave school, also have higher, what I call real world literacy and numeracy and problem solving skills, then maybe there isn't that deficit to overcome. So I think with my educator hat on, and I spend a lot of time working with school systems here in Australia, saying that within schools we should be teaching numeracy, not just mathematics. I see them as two different things. And I think it's the same in literacy. It is about engaging with the world outside the classroom. And as AI and technology gets used more and more, then we need to embrace that within the education sector. In my state here in Victoria, smartphones are banned from school classrooms. I don't know whether there's any other Victorians here listening to me, but that's a stupid idea. I mean, what do we all do when we want to do a calculation? What do builders do when they want to do a measurement? They probably get out their smartphone or their app to do the measuring. Doesn't mean you still don't have to teach all those basic skills, but to me, education and training needs to integrate the teaching and the learning of the skills in conjunction with technology. Otherwise, how are people ever going to know how to use the technology? If we ignore and ban ChatGPT, how's anybody ever going to know how to use it and be critical and use it effectively? So from putting my educator's hat on, we have to combine those skills in our teaching and our learning and take the benefits and be explicit about how we engage our students with this world of technology and show them how to use it and how to question it, problem solve and all that sort of stuff. If we ignore it, it's not going to help.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I think this aspect of, beyond the classroom, what we can do beyond the classroom is also important. And we had a comment from Sue Palmer that I think that echoes this. She talks about the role of play in all this. So, play also, we know now, has a very important role in building foundational skills. And so how do systems support skill development through play, especially at the early years, I think is something that we really need to grapple as well. So I think in PIAC, we look less at that, but I know the OECD, certainly we have lots of work on early childhood education. We'll have some more studies coming out next year. We'll look at that. Stain, I want to go back to you though, because we've talked a lot about foundational skills, the skills, how adults are developing those skills. But let's go to the labor market side of things. How do we actually see that AI is changing jobs already, and especially with respect to skills demand? What kind of skills do we see that people are requiring in this AI world as it's changing already?
Yeah, good question. It's something that we're trying to keep tabs on. It's not always easy to have the information. I think people talk a lot about AI skills, so developers, etc., that we need to invest in those skills, and it's true that those will be important, but it's a very small share of the workforce that will actually need those skills. So we've estimated that it's between 0.3 to 0.5% of the workforce will actually need these AI skills to develop AI tools, to maintain them. It's most people who will interact with AI will not need those very specific AI skills. They will need very general skills, and it's already been said several times on this panel that people will need very basic skills to be able to interact with these tools, numeracy skills, verbal skills, and also basic digital skills to be able to use these tools. Now, we have done a little bit of work looking at how looking at vacancies for jobs, job postings, and at the skills demanded within those job postings. And we've tried to see whether there's a correlation between how highly exposed these jobs and these occupations are to AI and to changes in skills demand by employers. So one thing that we notice is that on the whole, across the labor market, we see an increasing demand for things like digital skills, social and emotional skills also, and also business and management skills in these occupations that will have mostly to do with AI. But there's also something very interesting happening underneath the surface. So we looked at workplaces that were really highly exposed to AI, and we were able to track these workplaces over time and look at the vacancies that these workplaces posted. And within these vacancies, we could then track the changing demand and skills that these employers posted. And what we see there is that we're beginning to see the reduction in demand for some skills like budgeting skills, accounting skills, administration skills, basic word processing and spreadsheet skills. And these are all the kinds of things that AI is beginning to be able to do. And the kind of occupations that we're talking about here they're not the kind of highest paying, highest skilled occupations. We're talking about white collar support occupations. And I think, listening to some of the other interventions about who we should be targeting, I think it's that kind of not just the very bottom, but also people slightly higher up. So white collar support occupations, people working in finance and in human resources, in legal communications, administrative assistants, sometimes project managers even. But the skills that these people require is beginning to change in the labor market. And we see a reduction for certain type of skills, but we might also see an increase in other types of skills. But through all this, I think I fully support what the others have been saying, is that to be able to use these tools effectively, we will really need those basic skills, literacy, numeracy skills, and digital skills to be able to use these tools effectively.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. As you were speaking, I remember I used to work in the UN, and I'd walk around and you see photos of the typing pool. So people who used to work in offices and just do typing, all day long to type up notes. And obviously those jobs don't exist anymore. Technology, computers changed that. And so I guess what you're saying is that it's kind of analogous that it's those kind of task-based things might disappear, but they might change to other things indeed.
Yeah, and I should add that seeing a small reduction in the kind of skills demanded of these occupations doesn't mean these occupations will disappear. I mean, we often these people still have jobs, but just the jobs have changed a lot. The nature of the jobs have changed a lot, and I think this is the real key challenge of adapting to these changes. It's making sure that people have the skills to do the new tasks that will be demanded of them.
Absolutely. So maybe we can get a perspective from Canada now, Noel. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and Prime Minister Trudeau was, talking about how he's pushing very hard for Canada to become a world-class AI destination. And so I wonder, what does this mean for skills development? I mean, he talked a lot about infrastructure, about attracting top talent, but how is this actually affecting skills in the country, and what role does FSC have to play in this?
Yeah, it is interesting. Canada has developed a fairly active AI sector, big investments in places in Montreal and Toronto and Edmonton that focuses on the kind of the computing side and the development of the models. And federal government did invest or announced they would invest $2.4 billion in its most recent budget to continue that. Wrapped in that $2.4 billion is the the seeds of some of the answer to your question. There's 50 million there to start working with workers affected by disruptions as a result of AI on skilling and reskilling, either to kind of boost up their skills and continue in a sector, or to be able to be mobile and find a new sector. I think that's interesting. I don't know if that's the right ratio or the right level of investment, but I think you start to see the seeds of thinking about how do we contend with this. I wanted to go back to the survey I mentioned earlier, because we asked people about working with AI, and right now it's about 3 in 10 say they're actively using it in their job. What's interesting is of that 3 in 10, only 3 in 10 were told to do it by their employer, and only 1 in 4 had had any training on using the AI, right? So I think already you see a couple of really important gaps. Canadian firms are actually lagging behind their international peers in many sectors in the use of the technology. Although I saw a study recently, the Canadian financial services sector is actually among the leaders in adopting AI. But we're still trying to, I think, figure out what's the right kind of training and reskilling and upskilling opportunities that we need to offer to people, and how best to deploy it. Because that's the other question, right? Is you can build a lot of training opportunities, you can build a lot of training curriculum, but the diffusion out to people and where you reach them, whether it's in the workplace or through the education sector, I think is something that we're still working on. FSC ourselves working on that. We're investing with partners in a bunch of initiatives that are exploring these questions, both how do we kind of develop the training that we're going to need, and then what are the right pathways to do that through. So working with a lot of business partners, chambers of commerce, intermediaries like that, who can kind of at scale start to push this into places where people can get access to it. But I'm not sure that we've got the answer yet, and perhaps other OECD countries are a bit further ahead than us on that, and love to learn more about what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, I think, especially from the education side of things, as we move from a kind of traditional model of education to more of a kind of learning ecosystem where people can acquire skills from loads of different places, micro credentials, online courses, and things like that. How employers value those skills, or how skills are credited by employers is really important. And I don't think it's something that any country really has gotten on top of yet. But it's definitely a question that needs to be answered fairly soon. So Dave, as a kind of liberal arts major myself, I know there's been a big cry about all universities are now turning to STEM education, and that's the death of the kind of liberal arts. And so, is there a role for philosophy majors, creative thinking, these kind of things anymore in universities?
I mean, I'm probably asking the wrong person, even though I'm a numeracy maths person. I mean, I think there has to be. I mean, I think that, what we're talking about today is a range of thinking skills. And, that can be developed through any area of study, really. I mean, if, philosophy in the 21st century is probably a lot more complicated than philosophy back in the 18th century and the 19th century. So things evolve because of the society we live in, and therefore any study, I believe, is going to improve people's thinking, problem-solving skills. And I think if we combine that now with the opportunities of AI and the abilities to interact with AI in a range of different ways. I mean, I was talking to some vocational education training teachers just this week, and the opportunities to use AI to have a conversation with somebody who isn't a real person, but the potential in terms of education and training to use the benefits of AI, I think, extraordinary. And this could happen in philosophy, or it could happen in horticulture, or it could happen in, becoming an engineer. So that the opportunities of AI, virtual reality, I think, is something that, well, certainly in Australia, hasn't permeated into schools. And I think there's been this sort of bit of a standoff. I mean, I was joking before about smartphones. Well, I wasn't joking. But, if we don't enable these things to intersect and be integrated, and for AI to learn from educators. So, this has to be about collaboration. So everybody has to work with everybody else in order to move this forward. So, us educators need to be listened to in terms of how could you use AI in a teaching and learning situation. And, the difficulty in so many professions is to enable people to collaborate in a real world sense. Now, if AI can support that to happen in a virtual way, and the AI can take on board, the nuances of a conversation or a questioning or a debate about philosophy or whatever, then that opens up opportunities that we probably don't have in terms of person-to-person skills. So I think we need to embrace all of this, and everybody needs to start talking and collaborating. And that's why, organizations like Knowles is a vehicle for doing that. We stay in our silos too much, and then we're fearful of each other. So it seems to me that now is the opportunity. This is, young days in terms of AI. And I don't think, apart from, academics sort of questioning whether, having to have ways to check now whether somebody's done their answer via ChatGPT. So now you can plug it into some other app that'll tell you whether it's been copied. We always we're avoiding engaging in a productive way. So I think what we need to say, let's embrace all this, but that doesn't mean we just accept it all, because what we're also talking about here is having the critical thinking skills, and that's what workplaces need, to be able to reflect, to think, to question, to know what questions to ask, to what to look for. Does this solution meet the criteria that we want for our customers? Does it meet environmental constraints? So there's so many things in our world that we need to take on board. And it seems to me that AI, given its rapid growth, I think over the last, it's probably a handful of years, is a time for us to embrace it, but we have to work and collaborate together. And, I don't know, be interested to hear, Noel's opinion on, have you had conversations with educators? Because I think it's challenging to educators, which is possibly why we're banning it rather than embracing it.
Thanks, Dave. Well, let's hear from Noel then. I mean, Noel, what's your take on that?
I think I think in lots of ways, educators in Canada are trying to catch up, right? And we are starting to collaborate with, but so are others with folks in our education and our post-secondary education systems. And David, you're right. A lot of what people are working through right now is how to apply existing kind of notions of what the academy is about and policies to the new technology. A lot of it is about trying to figure out if people are producing original work, but that's not the limits of it. And I think there's a lot more creative use of it. I have some friends and peers who are working in our universities and colleges who are starting to incorporate it into the pedagogical approach they're taking to do exactly what you're talking about. Sort of how do you interrogate critically how to use this and what you're going to get out of it. So, but I think that first release of ChatGPT really caught a lot of people kind of flat-footed, and as we all get more chance to use it and experience it, I think we all get a better sense both of the strengths and limitations and also the opportunities. And yeah, we might not always catch up to the kind of leading edge of where the technology is, but we're all going to catch up to where it's going, partly because that's what we have done with all technology for all of time, right? Is eventually you kind of pick it up and figure out how to bring it into what you're trying to accomplish. But you're right, this is a moment to have some of those dialogues. Super important moment to have really critical conversations about how the models are made. And Sasha, you referred to them as a bit of a black box, right? We're starting to open some of those black boxes, and it's really important to be able to do that. There's really critical issues around things like equity that we have to be talking about before the technology is so far developed that we can't incorporate some of the things that I think we already know are important there.
Thanks, Noel. We're almost out of time, but I do want to get to one last line of inquiry that is really important that we haven't touched on yet, and that is this issue of equity, diversity. So, Noel, let's start with you. I mean, I know it's important for you as well, the diversity, building a diverse workforce, especially with respect to AI. Why is that important to FSC, and how are you working on this?
I mean, it's important for all kinds of reasons, right? We know that in Canada there are both kind of real-time and historical inequities and access to education and training and labor market opportunities. With the development of AI, I think also for Canada in particular, but probably for lots of other countries, um, I think really needs to force us to confront some intersecting issues, right? So we know that there are differences, for example, in skill proficiency among different parts of our population, and some of that is also rooted in geography, right? The more distance from one of Canada's larger population centers, the more likely we are to find lower skill proficiencies. So we already got a challenge there, and then layered on top of that is we also have a long-standing challenge around digital divide that runs on those same axes. And I think one of the worries is that as new technology that requires really robust things like digital infrastructure comes on board, there are some people who are going to be left even further behind. I will say it's not just in Canada's rural and remote communities. We did a study in the pandemic about access to broadband in our largest city, Toronto, the Greater Toronto Area. And we found a really surprising number, in particular, focused on how youth were accessing online learning during the pandemic. And there's a surprising proportion of people were accessing their online courses using a smartphone, using data, or having to access it at a public access point like a public library. And you know, you can imagine the socioeconomic dimensions of that. Those were a lot of the poorer residents of the city. A lot of those folks were racialized, they were newcomers. So I think we just need to really pay close attention to this. The next cycle of PAC results, I think, are going to tell us about some of those disparities across different parts of the population. And it is something that we're mindful of at FSC. This is part of our mandate as well. So, I mean, those are some of the reasons why it's important to think about this. And it's not just a secondary concern. It's right there at the top of the list as we try to make sure that the benefits of this can be shared as widely as possible.
Thanks, Noel. Stain, I want to give you the almost last word. I mean, I know what probably a lot of what Noel has said echoes with your own thinking, because I know last year's OECD Employment Outlook did recommend that countries work to build diversity in the AI workforce. So why did we make that recommendation, and why is this important?
So the AI workforce is almost exclusively highly educated and male. And whether this is conscious or not, they come to the development of these models with their own worldview, and that will influence the design of these AI models. So whether explicitly or implicitly, we're building in a view of the world that only represents a narrow section of the population. And so I think that is really important. And maybe I just want to say a few extra words. So it's really important that we increase the representativity of the entire population in the AI workforce. But I also want, I mean, now that we're on the topic of gender, which we haven't really touched upon very much so far, I just want to say maybe an extra word on AI and gender and skills in the workforce. Men and women are about equally exposed to AI. That's something that we've seen. But what we are seeing is that in the very highly skilled and highly exposed occupations, we see fewer women. So, and these are occupations that we think will highly benefit from AI. So we see some inequalities already appearing there as well. And we see also women in lesser skilled occupations that are highly exposed. And these are then the people who are more at risk of AI of AI and automation. And the other thing I want to say, which is very interesting, because PIAC is not just about what skills people have, but also the use of skills. And we see something very interesting in the use of AI. There was a really interesting study published recently, which looked at generative AI and the use within occupations of generative AI and compared men and women. And women were far less likely than men to use AI. Could be something to do with confidence. They perhaps said they needed more training, etc., to use these tools and feel confident to use these tools. But I think, again, this points to the issue of skills and confidence in using skills and which skills we're actually using in the workplace, because that's also really important to make a success of this technological revolution.
Thanks, Dane, for bringing up gender, especially since you make me feel even worse that we have an all-male panel here today. So apologies, diversity is very important to the OECD, and yes, we weren't able to get a panel together in time this time. Dave, I want to give you the very, very last word now. So after all this discussion, are you optimistic that we'll be able to build this foundational skills that we need going forward? What makes you optimistic?
Well, I think from our discussion, I think it's going to be challenging because I think it's a challenging world we're moving into. But I think undoubtedly foundation skills, and I would argue that those foundation skills, need to be extended for the reasons that we've talked about. That in order to take on the benefits of AI and automation, we need a more skilled workforce. And therefore, I think we need to target not just the bottom end for the social equity reasons, but also the middle group, because I think they're the ones who can maybe step up and take on some of the tasks and the jobs that are going to grow in the future and understand AI. So but I think it's going to require collaboration, inspiration, funding, policies, more organizations like Noel, so people actually do work together. And I think the benefits for education should be seen as a plus as well, and that that's going to help. But it is about how we get there, and everybody listening to everybody else and collaborating, and then everybody will benefit. And hopefully,
Absolutely.
the PEAC data will give us some rich data. We do have adaptive problem solving as well as literacy, reading and numeracy, and all of those background questionnaires and the use of all those skills and participating in training and education. So it is an amazing database. I'm really waiting to read that report and what it's going to tell us.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dave. Thanks to all of our panelists. Huge thanks. Thanks to everyone, the hundreds of people who've joined us online, who sent in questions. We really appreciate it. Please don't forget to check out all of our panelists' LinkedIn pages and follow them online. Check out what their organizations are doing. And of course, tune in to the launch of the PIAC results on December 10th. So thanks very much, everyone. I know if I have one good takeaway, it's going to be to turn off my phone tonight, stop doom scrolling, and go out and read a book with my kids. So try to work on those foundational skills with them. So thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.